First, the most fundamental picture of an economy is it innovating? Are young people learning well? Are new technologies emerging? And is there a high saving rate? China checks all those boxes. In other words, the fundamentals are strong. The education system is strong. The saving rate is high. Innovation is rapid. And China is the low-cost producer of high-quality advanced technologies, not across the board, but in many, many crucial areas. So this is not a weak economy. This is a strong economy. If I look at the United States, I have a lot different worry. The saving rate is very low. The budget deficits are enormously high. The debt is very high. And there's a lot of instability and no coherence of what America's trying to do. There's a lot of confusion. So I give China high marks on setting a clear path forward, investing heavily, and also designing a major program, which I strongly favor, the Belt and Road Initiative, in which China engages with a wide range of countries, especially in Southeast Asia, South Asia, Central Asia, Western Asia, Africa, and Latin America, to trade with those countries and for China to be the exporter of critical infrastructure for those countries, with China providing a lot of the financing because of the high saving rates. China has a significant trade surplus. The United States has an enormous trade deficit. How does one come to the conclusion that, therefore, that China is the country in economic crisis? I don't.
But the Financial Times, especially the Atlantic Council, I should say, claimed that China's economic reforms are nearing the end of the line and that progress has stalled or backslid. Similar criticism is found on Financial Times, for instance, about China throttling its private sector, even with a special section dedicated to China's economic slowdown. So, Professor Sachs, I want to get your feels, your analysis on the so-called stalling reforms or China trying to throttle its private sector. What's your take?
Well, my take is very different, and that is that China is extremely successful at innovation and increasingly, in fact, at dominating the new technologies, especially zero-carbon energy systems, whether it's renewables or fourth-generation nuclear, fast rail, which the United States still does not have 1 kilometer of fast rail. China has tens of thousands and is now sharing that technology in projects in different parts of the world. China is mastering 5.5G now. It's not only 5G, it's at least 10 times faster than when 5G was unveiled 5 years ago. In fact, this is a period of rapid technological advancement, despite the United States' attempt to stop this. So a lot of the rhetoric has been around for more than 30 years. We can go back to the 1990s when articles were written called The Myth of the East Asian Miracle, and that China was on the verge of collapse. And when the 1997 Asian financial crisis came, that was taken as proof that China's growth was over, and so on. So this has been the rhetoric for a very long time. It's mostly a kind of propaganda in the United States or the Anglo-Saxon world, because you mentioned the Financial Times as well. But the fact of the matter is that the real complaint of the United States in the past year was that China has overcapacity. And when you dissect what that term means, it means China has enormous capacity in industry, and not just in industry, but in the kinds of industry, zero carbon technology, digital sectors that are the the technologies of the future.
One of the underlying themes or conclusions that I'm reading from the various media reports criticizing the health of the Chinese economy is that the China model, which worked for the past few decades, is not working anymore. And the Chinese leadership, by sticking to that model, is stifling the Chinese economy. And what exactly is the Chinese model that they believe is not working anymore? Professor Sachs.
I think if I could interpret it, maybe the claim is that there's too much government intervention in the economy, or China's stifling entrepreneurship. Again, I think that this is Western rhetoric, not reality. Let me take a very pertinent and quantitatively important example. China is now the world's leader in electric vehicles. During the past 10 years, there were around 400 electric vehicle companies in China. They were competing like crazy. Of course, there's now a kind of a shaking out process where a few companies are becoming dominant, but the competition and the entrepreneurship has been absolutely intense. And the result is that China is taking the leadership in worldwide sales of electric vehicles. Also, China's domestic market now is remarkable in that more than 40%, I believe, of new car sales are electric vehicles. And when I recently visited Beijing, you see them everywhere, of course, with the green license plates, and you see a tremendous change in a short period of time. Since this is the direction that the entire world is moving towards because of the need for zero emission vehicles, China's in a very strong position. What is happening? The US is putting on tariffs. Europe is putting on tariffs. Is that a sign of failure of China? No, quite the contrary. It's a sign of remarkable success.
But what is the obsession?
To the point,
yeah. Sorry, what is the obsession to criticize the model? You know, as if there is one magic or one set of correct rules how to run the economy of a country, and if you don't follow that one, it's wrong. It's not going to work. Maybe it works temporarily, but eventually it's going to fail. It seems like the Western economics theory is the only right set of theory you can adopt. Other than that, nothing will work.
I think we should understand this mainly in geopolitical terms, not in theoretical or even ideological terms. This is geopolitics. China has been too successful from America's point of view. And there was a notable article roughly 10 years ago at the Council on Foreign Relations that was written by one of my former colleagues at Harvard University, Robert Blackwell, who became a leading American diplomat. And he said that China's rise is no longer in America's interest because America's grand strategy is to dominate. And now the US can't dominate if China's becoming so large. So already a decade ago, Blackwell and his co-author listed the measures that the United States should follow: closing the US market by tariffs, stopping the export of high technologies where the US did have an advantage, notably in semiconductors, trying to build trading relations that would exclude China, strengthening the military of the US alliance along the rimlands of China and the South China Sea. Well, the United States has followed through on all of those. That is a foreign policy. It also uses a kind of infowar to try to cast aspersions on China. And then when the US actively stops the trade with China, discourages American and other companies from investing in China, blocks high technology going to China, then it points a finger to China and says, aha, you see, your system isn't working. Well, this is a kind of propaganda or baiting of China. This is not serious analytics. Again, I don't believe that it is working. I believe that China is continuing to excel in innovation. I believe that China has a worldwide market. It is the low-cost producer of so many high technologies at this point. And I believe that the advent of the BRICS and the Belt and Road Initiative show that we're just moving to a different kind of world economy, with China playing an absolute leadership role in the part of the world economy that is not the U.S. and the EU.
Yeah. Well, this is very interesting that you're pointing out a different kind of economy, because China talks about a transition. Its priorities are different. In the past, it was quantity. Now it's quality, a high quality. And China, not like in the case of Japan, China pierced its own real estate bubble, let's put it this way, and still managing about 5% growth. So in that context, how do you look at the GDP growth target China has set, which some people are eyeing as the sole indicator of the performance of the Chinese economy?
These days, because of technological change, even the growth rates lose some of their meaning, because if you have a certain quantitative growth, but the quality of the goods is rising and is not captured in the GDP, you don't really measure the change. And it's not easy to measure the advances of technology, especially in the service economy these days, or say in the transformation of the vehicles to electric vehicles. So I have some skepticism anyway about the macroeconomic aggregates, no matter where they're deployed. I don't think that they are telling a true picture in a period of technological change. Again, I would look to the fact that China is the low-cost, high-quality producer of a very wide range, and I think an increasing range of goods in transport, in digital technologies, in supercomputers, in zero-carbon energy, in fourth-generation nuclear. These are very important areas in electric vehicles, as I mentioned. These are the technologies that the world needs over the next 30 years. China also, like every major economy, needs to make an energy transformation to a zero emission. China has set 2060 as the date to reach net zero, or at least before 2060. Right. I'd like to encourage China to do that by 2050, because China is so good at all of this and making these large transformations. That gives plenty of investments for China to make in the coming years. I hope that China would not be spooked by this kind of naive reporting by people who don't know basically very much of anything about the actual Chinese economy.
Let's talk about, some of the superficial indicators that have been cited by the mainstream media. For instance, China's foreign direct investment. It has nominally dropped considerably. This has been cited as some kind of result of people losing confidence in the future prospects of the Chinese economy. This is one thing. And then the real estate sector, there was this talk of China following Japan's 1980s Japanification trajectory with a debt-fueled property bubble, so on. So if you look at some of these and demographics, the population of newborns, the number of newborns in China are less as those who have died, who have passed away from the Chinese democratics. So how do you square these superficial indicators with what you just said about the fundamental health of the Chinese economy?
Well, first, when it comes to the question of comparisons with Japan, it's important to understand that Japan's end of high growth was actually a deliberate U.S. policy. Because in the 1980s, even though Japan was ostensibly an American ally, really an American subsidiary in a lot of ways, it was too successful from the point of view of American politicians. And so it was in the 1980s that the United States forced the yen to become overvalued. This was a deliberate set of steps in the mid-1980s. The United States imposed export controls, or had Japan impose export controls, so-called voluntary export restraints, which weren't voluntary at all. It told Japan, no, you can't export so many automobiles, you can't export so many electronics goods. The United States stopped Japan's rapid growth. And this is the playbook that the United States is using again vis-a-vis China. So the comparison has a certain aptness, but it wasn't that Japan just failed. It was by design. The United States said, you're becoming uppity. You're becoming too successful. You're taking away the business of American semiconductor firms. You're taking away the business of American electronics firms. You're taking away the business of American automotive firms. So the United States imposed the barriers. Now, when that happened, that had a secondary effect on Japan, because not only did the growth slow, but the asset prices in Japan were very high because they were based on an extrapolation of continued high growth. When the United States stopped the high growth, the asset prices fell, the so-called bubble burst. It became a bubble because the U.S. had slowed Japan's growth, forced the yen into an overvaluation, and the U.S. was unrelenting in the 1990s. Don't depreciate the yen. We're not going to give any margin. And the U.S. really did in the era of Japanese high growth. This will not happen in China. China's a lot larger than Japan. China has a lot more alternatives than Japan.
And China is not caving in to U.S. bullying.
Well, Japan was under the so-called security protection of the United States. China certainly is not. And in this sense, China doesn't have to accept the kind of treatment that Japan accepted, in fact, in the 1990s. I asked my Japanese colleagues at the time, already 30 years ago, why don't you take other measures? Jeff, it's very hard, you know. We really can't go against the United States. What China needs to do is to expand its exports to other parts of the world. It's doing that. It needs and should expand the Belt and Road Initiative. This is very successful. All the bad-mouthing by the United States of the Belt and Road Initiative should be a signal to Chinese leaders that it's actually very, very successful because the Americans are bad-mouthing it. They're scared of it.